judge here. We just correct. Happy brainwashing, everybody!
Brainwashing kids, huh? Well, they say write what you know. Dark Pals: The First Floor is a piece of media that I hesitate to acknowledge as a game, in the exact same way that I hesitate to acknowledge the offerings at Long John Silver's as fish. Both may look the part, but once you sink your teeth into the experience, all you end up with is a mouthful of artificial filler and immediate regret. But to more accurately sum up Darling Pets the Fluffy Felines, this is a game about shoving together every single mascot horror trope and a bunch of lol random humor to appeal to the absolute widest possible audience while putting in minimal effort. If that sounds unfair, let me tell you how this game starts. You find yourself in a massive, probably underground facility designed for children, and you are now most likely able to accurately guess every last thing that happens in this game. Now, I've played my fair share of Mascot Horror, the majority of which I don't like, but I've always found something to compliment. Poppy has fantastic character animation and oppressive level design. Bendy and the Ink Machine has a couple fun characters and one really great monster, and FNAF Security Breach has one of the coolest designed Mega Malls in human history. In Dark Pals, however, there was literally nothing I found interesting, entertaining, or engaging. That is because this game is, in my opinion, a scientifically distilled, perfected example of mascot horror slop. But I'm not here to just talk about why this game is bad, though I will be doing that. I'm here because this game has made me legitimately depressed, as I feel it is the shining example of everything wrong with mascot horror, and represents just how far the genre has fallen since its Grandpappy Freddy burst onto the scene. So this is half going to be a review of the worst mascot horror slop I've ever played, and half an analysis on how this game represents everything currently wrong with the genre. Now, there's one point I want to address before we get started. Some people may argue that this game isn't taking itself seriously, and thus I shouldn't have a hate boner over it. For that first part about this game not taking itself seriously,
The last thing we want is those pesky little stinkers wriggling free mid-session and having to send Binky after them. Happy brainwashing, everybody!
I wrote a song so you can sing along and hope we don't get it wrong.
Hey, it's me, it's Omelette Man. He bakes cookies like nobody can.
Yes, I will absolutely give you that. This game is not taking itself seriously. But I'm about to drop on you all the take of the century. Just because something doesn't take itself seriously, that doesn't give it an excuse for being absolute shit. I also don't think this game is a parody either, because a parody is something that pokes fun at the source material, questions it, makes jokes about it. A parody is not something that just regurgitates all the same tropes as the source material while throwing in some entirely unrelated, all random humor. I mean, let's take a look at some other games that don't take themselves seriously. Hi-Fi Rush is literally modeled after a Saturday morning cartoon, and it is in one of my top 10 best games of all time. Octodad is basically a joke turned into a game, and it's legitimately charming and well written. Cruelty Squad is that, and yet it's still a very fun game to play. And if you want an example of a more traditional shitpost being good, take a look at the beauty that is lovingly titled Pootis Engage. So I am perfectly within my rights to point at this game and say it's bad. But let's stop stalling and get on with explaining my overly dramatic and clickbaity title, Why Dark Pals: First Floor represents everything wrong with mascot horror. To start things off, I should probably attempt to explain to you what happens in this game. Thankfully, this won't take long, because this game has no plot, or at least no plot other than exactly what you think is happening. Upon pressing start, we find ourselves in an elevator going down, the doors open, and yes, less than 10 seconds into this game, we've already stumbled upon the first item for our list of grudges: lack of character motivation. Mascot Horror has become rather lazy in terms of establishing character motivation, and Bark Boy's Flatulence Floor is probably the best example of that fact. You see, the reason our character has arrived in this dirty, dirty place is because...
Hey, you trailed off there, Cheese.
Oh, you'd think so, wouldn't ya? No, this game gives you literally zero motivation for being here. The elevator stops, you get out, pick up this cute squid gun, and then off you go like nothing happened. And unfortunately, a lot of Mascot Horror isn't that much better, giving us very little character motivation and hoping you'll get invested just because you think the characters look cool. And while this unfortunately works, it's extremely lazy. All flash and no substance, and it's going to drastically harm the story in the long term. To demonstrate, imagine this was Frodo's motivation in Lord of the Rings.
Frodo, take this ring and throw it into Mount Doom.
But why, Gandalf?
Because it is evil.
Oh. How?
I cannot tell you anymore.
Why?
Because otherwise the story wouldn't be vague enough. Now go! Embark on your confusing journey and get that game theory video!
In general, the very basics for good motivation is threefold. Connect the character to the motivation, connect the gameplay to the motivation, and connect the player to the motivation. Now try this test on a game like Poppy Playtime and it simply will not work because the game just tells us you're here to find your coworkers, and then the game just kind of forgets about that until the end of chapter 3 where it's revealed that they were all dead all along. Okay, great, never saw that coming. But let's try applying this test to Pinky, Linky, and the Stinky Binky. Connect the character to the motivation. What motivation? Connect the gameplay to the motivation. What motivation? Connect the player to the motivation. Now you might argue this doesn't apply if the game wants the main character's motivation to be murky or unknown, but
No, that's wrong!
take the case of James Sunderland from Silent Hill 2. The very opening lines in the game establish that he wants to find his wife in the town of Silent Hill, though that might be problematic considering his wife is extremely dead.
A dead person can't write a letter. It's illegal.
So despite us having the motivation of find our wife, we're not entirely sure we have the full picture, because why the hell would James be looking for someone he knows is already dead unless there's something more going on? But even with this murky motivation, James still passes that test, thus helping keep us invested alongside James. And it's not hard to make a good motivation, heck, it's actually pretty easy. Hell, I'll do it right now for Dink Pinks. Before the game loads, we get a picture saying, "Come to this address, we have your dog." And bam, I have literally just fixed this game's motivation. You'll see why later, but trust me, adding this one little line alone would make this game 10 times better, but that's lack of character motivation on the books, so let us continue with the game. After picking up this gun, to which I will resist the incredible temptation to make some kind of Splatoon joke, we get a little presentation welcoming us to a world of wonder and whimsy, and to be entirely honest, Secret of the Mimic did it better. We then take our ticket and step into a grand lobby where we are greeted by a real-ass man giving us a generic "Welcome to our totally not suspicious facility" message in the most generic way you can imagine.
Welcome to a world of imagination, a world of hopes and dreams, a place your child will always remember.
Now, I personally find it a little bit distracting when they use real-life footage of people in-game, as it usually takes me out of the experience, unless that's the whole point, like in Alan Wake 2, because that game is goated. But I recognize that this is more of a personal taste thing, so I'm not going to make that a criticism here. In order to move on, we need to get our ticket one stamp from each attraction. I'm going to be incredibly generous and say that this here is not for obvious padding, but to teach us the mechanics of the game. I say generous because between the three mechanics of popping balloons, moving physics objects, and shooting a target, only the shooting a target mechanic is ever used again, and I'm pretty sure most people can figure out that a gun can shoot things. But we move on, walk down this hall for about 10 feet, and then meet Chompy Chasey, but that name is just lazy, so I'm going to be doing my usual thing and calling him various silly names. Sir Puggington III just stares at us for a second, pukes up a vial of ink, and then leaves, and if we're using my made-up motivation of a lost dog, this would immediately move the story forward, because why the hell has our dog been turned into a giant toy-like monster? But back in the real world where this game has no plot, we can now learn the final mechanic of our squid gun. By expending a vial of ink, we can paint various objects in the world. If that sounds fun, yes, it sounds fun, but you can no doubt already tell from my tone of voice that this isn't going to be the case, you beautiful, brilliant butterflies. This, again, isn't going onto the list of grudges because it's a bit specific to this game, but I want to point out that the marketing makes the ink gun to be a really interesting and dynamic puzzle mechanic, but in reality, this is how it plays out. Encounter an object that needs to be painted red. Find a vial of red. Paint the object red. There's no puzzling here, no deduction. In reality, this is just a fancy key. Thus, the entire painting mechanic is just like me after I made my Let's Play of Dark Pals into a game of take a shot every time you see a Mascot Horror cliche, completely wasted. By the way, I do heavily recommend you watch that playthrough on my second channel. It is legit the most tilted I have ever been across both of my channels. And there's no plot either. There's literally no plot other than we're experimenting on kids. Bet you never seen that before! God! Sorry, I'm just frustrated. Link in the description, see you there. If nothing else, as we enter this library, I can give the game this. It's gorgeous. The environments are colorful. We're constantly awash in warm and cozy tones. A lot of areas have fun fairy tale themes with really beautiful lighting. There's a great underlying whimsy to everything, and the entire mood is so relaxing and pretty, and wait a goddamn second. Here's a fun test. Take your favorite horror game. Now remove all the monsters. Is the environment still scary? If yes, congratulations, that's good game design. If not, you get Dark Pals, the first fool for buying this trash. To demonstrate, I'm going to take several shots from several areas in this game, and then I'm going to ask you a question. What is inherently scary about what we're looking at? What about this place is supposed to invoke fear? Unless you're afraid of abandoned buildings that are for some reason perfectly lit, there's not much here to be afraid of. Now, I'm not against the existence of safe areas in horror games. In fact, I'd argue they are incredibly necessary for the sake of pacing, but these should be rare, usually after big chaotic climaxes. Unfortunately, the majority, if not all of this game looks at best a little disorganized, and at worst, cozy enough that a magical gnome can live here. And we see this problem in a lot of Mascot Horror. Take Indigo Park for example. Most of this game is very well lit with wide open spaces, colorful and inviting tones, and a severe lack of creepy sounds or ambience. There are a few areas that can be described as scary, but they're very rare and don't usually last that long. That's not to say a colorful environment can't be scary, it's just more difficult than, for example, a spooky haunted castle or a deteriorating underwater base. For example, My Friendly Neighborhood does a great job of this. By using harsh shadows, cramped halls, unnerving ambience, there are plenty of areas that feel threatening. But in Dark Pals, because everything is so open and inviting, the only time I feel any kind of tension in this game is when a monster is actively threatening me. Simply put, this place isn't creepy enough, claustrophobic enough, or dangerous enough to make me fearful while exploring it. In a horror game, I should be constantly wondering if that noise over there was the monster. I should feel isolated. I should feel trapped. But with how bright and open this game is, I never get any of that. Instead, we get a puzzle. And as somebody who really likes first-person puzzle games, this one is fine. Solid a 6 out of 10. If I had to criticize, and I do, it's the point of this video, it's that the game just showed us Big Boy Bow Wow and then does nothing with that. We don't see him creeping around. We don't hear him panting in the distance. We're just doing a puzzle after seeing the monster, and nothing scary happens until it does. Okay, so now this is where the game is gonna start making us scared, right? Having him roaming around, threatening us while solving the puzzle, and why do I bother asking these hypotheticals? Y'all already know the fucking answer. No, he just kinda leaves, and we continue with the puzzle, so alright. After that, it's on to a theater, where we get another tongue-in-cheek video where we're told that our children are totally safe here, right before we get another tongue-in-cheek video telling the employees how to apply restraints and beatings at children who are getting out of line, followed by another tongue-in-cheek video where, and you're never gonna see this one coming, we learn that the children are going to be subject to horrible experiments, and this is another problem I have with modern Mascot Horror.
You never see it.
Let's turn the clock back to the first Five Nights at Freddy's game. Sure, by the end, it was pretty obvious that the 5 missing kids were now piloting their own scary, smelly, furry mechas, but do you know how that story was told?
Very, very slowly.
Never stating it outright, and by letting the player piece it all together. So now let's take that original FNAF story and run it through the level of writing we see in Dark Pals and, to be frank, most Mascot Horror these days.
Hey there, welcome to Fazbear Inc., where we know you'll find a job for the rest of your life. Hope you enjoy your stay, but just one piece of advice. Don't look in the animatronic suits. For one, you're not qualified, and two, there's a bit of a company secret inside. We assure you it has nothing to do with a missing children incident, and don't mind the smell either. We promise, there is absolutely nothing horrifying inside. Now get out there and make a killing. In profits.
Yeah, that is literally the level of writing we see here, and it's garbage, because it immediately kills any possible mystery or suspense. We immediately know everything about the plot. There's nothing to make us wonder, it's just, well, this place is torturing kids, glad we got that out of the way. Sure, we don't know why they're torturing kids, but that's more of the dressing than the main course. And because of this lack of subtlety, there is nothing challenging here. No logical connections, no dawning moment of realization, no mystery. Instead, it's spelled out as blatantly as possible to make sure streamers can go, "Ugh," when the game just straight up tells them, hey, we're torturing kids. Isn't that crazy? And again, solving this problem is easy. Just remove all these stupid videos saying, uh-oh, looks like we've got some children in trouble. Wink. Yeah, I'm aware this guy's a popular YouTuber and I have nothing against him, but saying a horror game is good just because it's got a YouTuber you like in it is the exact same reason we got Russell Crowe in Les Miserables. Or to hit closer to this game's demographic, why we got Chris Pratt as Mario, not Charles Martinet. I'm still salty about that. The guy is legitimately a talented voice actor.
The Blades are wise not to trust me. Only Khan Niov. I would not trust another Dova.
But after viewing this very predictable film, we walk outside and wander around for about 5 seconds before getting jump scared by Get Along Little Doggy. We then go through what is probably the worst linear chase in all of horror gaming, because it is literally linear, as in you just run in a straight line for about 10 seconds. Now, if you've watched literally any video on my channel, you'll know I have a personal crusade against these linear chases. So to spare my regular viewers from another long rant, I'll briefly summarize and yes, add it to the list. There's nothing inherently wrong with a linear chase, just like there's nothing inherently wrong with hot sauce. But use too much of either and you get the same result, an experience that ends in nothing but a case of the runs. There are a handful of ways to use linear chases properly, but I'm going to just talk about two. One of those ways is for the monster to corral you into a contained area that is also dangerous, like the first chase in FNAF Security Breach. Yes, that game did do some things right, about 4 or so, and this is one of them. The other way to properly use a linear chase is to finish off a longer encounter where the monster has been hunting you, acting as a natural climax. Otherwise, a linear chase is an incredibly shallow experience. There's no acting or reacting between you and the monster, no listening to puzzle out where it is, no scampering off to hide as it gets closer. You just run in a single direction on a linear path until the game says, okay, you've reached the finish line, you can stop now. All this game gives us are 2.5 linear chases that are entirely scripted, though in retrospect this isn't much of a surprise, as the devs were clearly afraid of forcing the player to actually think, unless of course it's about the lore, guys, the lore! The lore! By the way, if you had any doubt that this game is nothing but a giant attempt at farming content, the main menu literally has a direct link to their lore page. Speaking of not thinking, we now have to solve Baby's first find the code puzzle. Where could it be? I just can't. And upon solving this impossible problem, the dog is now for some reason friendly to us. I say for some reason because I legitimately don't understand why pressing his teeth in this order does that. If we had taken something out of his mouth, that'd make sense, but you know what? I forgot what game I was playing. I ain't supposed to think. And for more evidence of that, we have some more quote-unquote puzzling to do, as in, we wander for a little bit, do a shooting gallery, find a paint key, use the paint key, find another paint key, use the paint key, do a jumping puzzle, and then we meet Ranky Barnes. Just like with Rough Rowdy, he isn't actually hostile to us right now, and in fact seems pretty chill. And now I can talk about the next problem with Mascot Horror. Regardless of how you feel about these monsters' designs, this game, along with most other Mascot Horror games, don't take real advantage of how creative and crazy their designs are allowed to be, especially given that Mascot Horror typically leans towards the more fantastic these days. For both Block Teeth Bob and Baby Bottle Top, the game just drops these Fisher-Price Baby's First horror monsters in front of you and shouts, here they are, the monsters, be sure to get a really long look at them so you can recognize our brand! In other words, this doesn't feel like they're introducing a scary monster that's going to stalk us, it feels like advertising. Just like I do when I show you my cheesy merch, shirts, mugs, all made locally by a friend I know in real life. Go take a look at her Etsy store in the description. Look, there's nothing inherently wrong with merchandising, I just take issue when the entire game is based around it. But getting back on track, there's a reason practically every single horror game, movie, book, and campfire story keeps their monsters hidden or obscured before the big reveal. Because, to quote Carmine Falcone from Batman Begins,
Y siempre temerás a lo que no entiendes.
What you don't know is always scarier than what you do know. And it's a shame too, because a lot of Mascot Horror designs can have some really fun ways to tease at what they are. And there's no better example of this than Mommy Longlegs. The game does so many cool things to tease her design, playing with silhouettes, hearing her voice from afar, seeing her limbs stretch towards us, but all this effort is wasted because she spent like 2 minutes just monologuing in our face while we could see her perfectly fine, instead of doing the correct thing and saving her reveal for the end. I swear, the conversation must have been, no, you can't hide the monster. Not enough kids will play to the end and thus never see our marketable character. Make sure you shove her in the player's face right near the start. That'll boost sales. Like, I got no proof of this, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And of course, even after being introduced, monsters are still a base level of scary because they are creatures that could just straight up kill us. But by shoving them in our face like this, you are losing out on so much potential horror flavor. It's like ordering a plate of my famous chicken and mushroom pasta with a pepper jack mornay, and then washing off all the sauce and eating just the chicken. Yes, I did make this joke just because I wanted to eat this for dinner. Bite me. Now, there are cases where having the monster on full display is a good idea, but that really only works with more realistic designs like the FNAF 1 animatronics. Granted, Mascot Horror doesn't really do this much anymore, especially with Mascot Horror slop like this. So for the sake of keeping this video brief, let's just go ahead and jot this down in the list of grudges and move on. We then get a weird section where Flabby Tammy tells us to get in bed, and to be fair, yes, I also wouldn't want to argue with a temperamental baby the size of a gorilla, where we're then invited to peek on yeah, no, I'll give the game this. That is just straight up gross. And disgust can absolutely work in a horror game to give a feel of discomfort. I guess that's one thing the game did right, so congratulations, you just went from a 1 out of 10 to a 2. Problem is though, this isn't scary, it's just weird. In fact, the game has really only tried to scare us once in the Puggy Wuggy chase segment, and that only lasted like 10 seconds, so are we sure this is supposed to be a horror game?
Here we go! Hey, it's me, it's Omelette Man. nobody can.
Okay, we now have a drawn-out segment where the Omelet Man plays on loop and we solve a puzzle where nothing scary happens. Maybe the next encounter will be somewhat scary? In a manner of speaking, I've figured it out. I have figured it out. This is not a horror game. Hell, it's barely a game. This is a collection of lol random and what the fuck moments specifically designed to bait streamers into giving huge reactions so they can post it all over their TikTok and Instagram accounts to get a bunch of free viral marketing. I've cracked the code. So let me ask you, what actually have we done in this game that evokes horror? When, from a gameplay standpoint, have we actually been in danger? And yep, that's our next list item. In this entire game, the only moments where we, the fleshbag Pedros playing this game, engage in any real dangerous or scary moments are the linear chase with Pug Chomsky where all you have to do is hold forward for like 10 seconds, 2 linear chases with Rumbly Tum Tum Tom that last about 30 seconds and don't have any interesting twists or turns like with Mommy or Big Top, and then a 10-second boss fight that is just objectively poorly designed, but we'll get to that later. So that's what, a total of 2 minutes tops that were in any real danger? And considering this game only took me 40 minutes to beat, that's only 5% of this horror game where we can actually die. Look, practicing restraint in a horror game is important. The player shouldn't be constantly threatened by the monster, not even for half the game. And you should absolutely have moments where the player can cool off and feel safe. But you need to fill that gap between those moments with other scary things. Make us think the monster is a threat to us. Give us creepy visuals, creepy sounds, anything to make us feel unnerved or uneasy. And this trend is frustratingly common in Mascot Horror games. Indigo Park has literally only one section where the player can die, and that's a linear chase at the very end. Poppy Playtime Part 5 just fucks around with stretches of gameplay that last literal hours without anything scary happening. And in Dankin' Donuts The First Flan, there's nothing creepy about the jumping puzzles in Mickey's Mushroom Forest. I'm not intimidated by these dragons in Paper Mario Goes to Camelot, and I sure as fuck am not scared by this dancing bastard who sings like he's got his balls stuck in a vice grip. I do, however, want to try a banana, blueberry, and white chocolate cookie. That unironically sounds pretty good.
How is it?
Pretty good.
The very last section is that aforementioned, objectively poorly designed boss fight. The reason I say this is because you're almost guaranteed to die at least once. Because if you stay and watch this actually kind of fun horror monster fight, the moment ticked off Tommy throws "dang it, doggy" through the window, he immediately chases you down and kills you. No, instead of watching this choreographed monster fight, you should have been doing this. Running around to the other side of the merry-go-round, shooting this target, which makes this number appear, which then for some reason causes a whole bunch of other bullshit to happen and carry you to safety. We then get the final frustrating trope that happens in every Mascot Horror game, and the last thing to talk about. I cannot overstate how frustrating this is because it happens in basically every Mascot Horror game, and it's a massive waste of potential. Imagine you're playing Poppy Playtime. You survive the Miss Delight chase, and instead of her dying at the end, you just escape and leave her trapped inside. Then later, all the way forward in Part 5, you're wandering around the facility, not worried about much of anything, and then BAM! Lights go out. And suddenly you hear... How goddamn hype and terrifying would that be? That, oh shit, she's back feeling. And on top of that, bringing horror monsters back for a second round allows them to evolve. You can make them more difficult, more dangerous, because the player has already experienced them once and thus can handle a bigger challenge. But modern Mascot Horror doesn't do that, and I know exactly why. Juggling multiple characters in a horror game is difficult, and Mascot Horror games tend to have tons of characters because the more characters you have, the more merchandise you can sell. So instead of juggling like 12 different characters all running around, the formula is introduce marketable character, have it chase the player for a bit, and then kill it off to make room for the next marketable character. And you can absolutely kill off a monster and replace it with another, but there has to be a reason for it other than, gotta sell those toys! In both Dark Descent and Machine for Pigs, after the game has gotten everything it can out of the current monster, we see a new monster bullying and killing the old one. This isn't for the sake of adding a new character to the roster, it's both to establish the greater danger and to keep the threat fresh. Granted, I can't exactly say I'm disappointed to see Blubber Nugget bite it, since I found him more gross and annoying than scary, but my point still stands. We then go down this elevator shaft, meaning we probably are going to get the massive complex that is underground for literally no reason trope, because why bother trying to make something original when you can just regurgitate what's already proven to be successful? And that is honestly my biggest problem with this game. There is nothing original about it. Generic abandoned complex made for kids? Check. Marketable monsters that don't immediately threaten the player? Check. Tongue-in-cheek, we're totally not going to kill you humor? Check. Tool that looks fancy but is really just a roundabout key? Check. Throwing in popular YouTubers for quick engagement? Check. Releasing in multiple parts to drag things out for as long as possible? Check. Putting the player deep underground because it's easier and makes things feel more sinister? Check, 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 check. And the worst part is it doesn't do any of these generic checklist items well. It really does feel like the creators of this game were just looking at what made other games successful and decided to emulate that without any real thought or care, and that is why this game is the perfect example of everything wrong with Mascot Horror. But what do we do with that fact? Look, I'm not so arrogant to think that this YouTube video is going to blaze across the industry and cause all the Mascot Horror developers to go, "Ah, shit, that random Weird Al lookalike was right." Because that's a pretty big change, and I'm just a little guy. Really, the most I can hope for is to change a few minds. And not by much, granted. I don't think I'm going to convince anyone who really likes this game to suddenly turn their back on it. No, I'm hoping to be more of a worm squirming around at the back of your mind. So maybe, next time you're playing or watching a Mascot Horror game and you see these tropes in play again, maybe you take a small step back and think, is it really that scary? Is this really good gameplay? Is this really telling an interesting story? Or is this just a bunch of loud noises and bright colors trying to get a quick, cheap reaction out of me? Or maybe you're watching this video because you also hate this game and just wanted to see me drag it through the mud, in which case, welcome to the sty. There's plenty of mud to go around.